Hi there, this is Dr. Anna Maria Helt here with Basmati.com. I'm an herbalist and microbiologist. I'm going to talk about oak this week. I recently published an article on Basmati talking about oak, so you can look that up when you feel like it. But what I want to talk about specifically are acorns, because we're going to be coming into the fall pretty soon. And it's acorn harvesting time when that happens, especially if you are lucky enough to live somewhere like California where there are a gazillion oaks and lots of acorns. Where I live here in Colorado, we also have a ton of oaks. We have scrub oaks here, gamble oaks, and oaks actually are found throughout the temperate world. So it's not usually that hard to find an oak unless maybe you're stuck in the middle of the city. Maybe you have a park. Anyway, Pliny the Elder actually considered oaks the tree which first produced food for mortal man. And indeed, acorns are really nutritious food, and they've been eaten for thousands and thousands of years as a staple. And they're starting to undergo a bit of a resurgence in natural food circles as a really nutritious and great tasting food. And so acorns are very rich in fat and in protein and in starch as well. So in some ways, they're a complete food in that regard. They've got, carbs, fat, and protein. They're rich in calcium. They're rich in magnesium, phosphorus, vitamin C, and other micronutrients. And in fact, it's estimated that, oaks as a food staple crop would use up about 1/10 the water that grain cultivation does. Although in areas like California, where there are thousands and thousands of millions of oaks, cultivation might not be necessary, at least not yet. But something to consider as an environmentally friendly food source as we look at things going on like the Amazon burning and are questioning how we're going to feed a planet of almost 8 billion people now. Anyway, back to oaks. I want to keep this fun because they are really fun food to harvest and a delicious one to harvest. And so, again, we're coming into the fall pretty soon. And what you want to look for are the acorns ripening on the tree and getting bigger. And when they're ready to harvest, they will be a rich brown color. And one way that they're frequently harvested is right after they hit the ground. You don't want them to be laying on the ground too long before you harvest them, because they might get preyed upon by insects. They might start getting moldy or cracked before you can even harvest them. So you want to get them quickly after they hit the ground. You want to avoid the greenies that are the first ones to fall off the tree as we're going into the season. They're never going to ripen, but later on as the season progresses, some of the ones that are a little bit more greenish on the ground will likely turn brown after you harvest them. Now, some people actually pull the acorns directly from the tree, and that's fine as long as they're releasing from the tree really easily. If you're having to yank on it, it means that acorn's not ripe yet. Even if it's still greenish, if it pops off pretty easily, it should continue to ripen to a nice rich brown color. Again, look for holes, because other things like to eat the acorns besides us and squirrels, and so there will be an insect living inside that acorn if there's a hole in it. Watch out for mold. Watch out, again, for the ones that have already cracked before you've gotten them. Now, so once you harvest your acorns, they can actually be stored for a few months. Just make sure it's somewhere dry and where they're getting a lot of air circulation. They were traditionally stored in baskets that allowed air to come through, and you would stir the acorns around periodically so that the ones sitting on the bottom wouldn't get more damp and start to grow mold. So make sure if you are storing them for a while that they're well ventilated. And some people have even started sprouting their acorns, and actually if you keep them long enough, they may sprout on their own. And as with grains, sprouting them makes them more digestible, but a lot of people don't bother with this step. It's up to you. Sprouting is reputed to make them taste sweeter though as well, so it's something you could experiment with. But regardless, once you've got your acorns in hand, you need to crack through that tough shell. And this is actually easier after you've stored them indoors for a few days. But you're going to need either a good hammer to kind of wallop them with, or maybe a rock. And maybe a rock that you can do the beating on, or if you have a concrete patio or something like that you can use for cracking these. And you need to practice this, because what you don't want to do is really wham them and just crush the heck out of the acorn, but you do need to hit them hard enough for them to crack open, and you'll figure it out as you go. Some people actually find as they store their acorns inside over time, some of them start to crack open on their own. And you would want to gather those rather quickly rather than just letting them sit like that where they can go off. Now, the next step after you crack open your acorns is to leach out the tannins. Tannins are very bitter tasting chemicals that are very rich or at a pretty high level in acorns. It's going to make them unpalatable, and it will also cause constipation and possibly inhibit nutrient uptake in your intestine if you keep eating tannin-rich acorns without leaching the tannins out. So you want to use water because tannins are water soluble to leach the tannins out. Most people use the so-called cold water method where you've shelled your acorns and you grind them down to a really coarse meal. I was taught to put them in a sack at that point and leach them in a stream, which if you have a clean stream nearby and animals that are not going to come steal your acorn mash, then that's a way to go. But maybe a safer way to go would be to just do this in your kitchen, where you put that meal in a big wide mouth jar, fill that jar with clean water, about 3 times the volume of water per volume of acorn mush, and you stick it in the fridge. And what you'll do is change the water maybe a couple times a day, shaking it really well, and then pouring the whole thing through a really fine mesh strainer, replacing the water, putting it back in the fridge. And you're going to keep doing this until the water gets more clear and doesn't taste bitter. This can take several days. It can take a week. It depends on the species of oak that you're using, because different species of oak have different tannin levels in their acorns. There's a guy online that talks about using the not the toilet bowl, but the top part of the toilet that stores the water, the tank, to do the leaching for him. So he cleaned it out, in the top part, just to be clear, and put his sack of meal in it, and every time somebody would flush, the water would get changed. I'm not so keen on doing that, even though I know the water's clean in the top. I don't know. That has not been the method that I've used. But if you are, for instance, on a cistern and you have really limited water supply, or you're on a well that's maybe not so speedy at replenishing itself, that actually might be a reasonable way for you to go and conserve water. Anyway, there is a faster method of leaching. There's a hot water method, where rather than grinding your acorns down, you just kind of pound them into pieces and you boil them and change the water out every hour or so. And it's going to take a good chunk of the day for that water to be clear and to not taste so bitter. And that's a way to go. The problem with the hot water method, though, is you're also cooking the starches in the acorn, and it's going to render them not very useful for baking, for making flour out of. But if you just want to roast your acorn chunks as a really delicious snack, then just do the hot water method. It's fine. If you do want to use your acorns, though, for flour and baking and such, then do the cold water method, because that will not cook up and denature those starches. It'll give you more flexibility in what you do with your acorns. But regardless of the means that you use to leach the tannins out, you then need to dry either your mush or your chunks of acorn flesh. So you can either, my favorite way is to put it in the sun, as long as you don't have any resident squirrels or birds that are going to make off with them. Or you can use a food dehydrator. And if you're using your acorns for baking, you want to make sure to have that dehydrator on low, in fact, below 150, so that the starches aren't cooked. But again, if you're doing the hot method and you just want these as a snack, now's the time to roast them, and they're delicious that way. Now, uses, aside from roasting them as a snack, there are so many ways you can use your acorns. And so the way I first had them was actually cooked into pancakes, and they were delicious. They bring a really delicious texture and nutty flavor to your recipes. Now, keep in mind that acorn flour will not rise, and so if you do want to use them in baking for a product that rises, say a bread that's not a flat bread, then you will need to mix the acorn flour with regular flour in that case. Otherwise, maybe you could use it as a flatbread if you didn't want to do that, and use it as kind of a gluten-free flour substitute. People have made porridge out of acorns, so kind of like an oatmeal-y kind of thing, breakfast. So you throw some fruit in there, maybe some molasses, and it's a wonderful way to start your day. I've seen a recipe for acorn mousse online. Breads, veggie burgers, falafels, acorn polenta, which is the way I really like it, sauces, gravies. There's so many ways that you can use your acorns. You're only limited by your imagination. So get ready to harvest, and hopefully this has inspired you to get out and meet your local oak trees. And so until next time, be well.